All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started. Again, I'm Corey Stanley, Navionics technical specialist for Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. I appreciate everyone attending. This is my first one of these webinars to do this year. Typically I do several a year through Navionics. I always start them off with a Navionics sonar chart example, just to kind of show you the importance of that. So we'll go ahead and jump right into that. All right, guys, this is actually Toledo Bend that I'm sharing here on my screen. I live about an hour south of Toledo Bend, one of my home lakes. The Bassmaster Central Open is actually going on right there right now, so I thought it'd be a perfect example of a lake to use. There's a lot of good structure, a lot of good contours between Toledo Bend and Sam Rayburn, so it'll give us a good example of kind of what I look for when I approach a body of water, when I'm throwing a crankbait. First of all, let's talk about the sonar chart program with Navionics real quick. And what the sonar chart program is basically the sonar chart layer that is on the Navionics Platinum card, Regions Plus card, and the Nav Plus card all have the sonar chart layer. The sonar chart layer stores all updates that are kind of secondary updates to the main map. If you look down the bottom left-hand corner, right now I'm on Navionics' website. This is just a chart viewer. It's 100% free. Right now Navionics averages several, around 20,000 updates a week, all across U.S. and Canada. So as soon as the updates are done, you can view those. They automatically update on the Navionics web app. The bottom left-hand corner down here, you'll see a little button. It says Navionics or sonar charts. If you click on just the Navionics portion, it'll show you what was there on the original base mapping before all the updates. And with the sonar chart program, you basically have anglers who are recording sonar data, submitting it to Navionics, and they have the technology to take your GPS position versus the depth and the current water level of the lake, and they can map these contours. As you can see, so I'm here on Toledo Bend. This is in Pirates Cove. This is one of the popular areas a couple years ago where Kevin Van Dam won actually throwing a crankbait. We're going to go over a lot of stuff in this area. This little area has a lot of stuff to offer. It's on the Louisiana side, but you can kind of see that's that's what's there. You see some cut lines of stuff that's missing. A few years back, Navionics actually split with years and years ago. It was an Navionics hotspots map. Well, Navionics and hotspots split. Some of the data they pulled, that's why it's like perfect cut lines when they made that split. So when you first get an Navionics card, the very first time you put it into your Lowrance, Humminbird, whatever chart plotter you're using, you need to go on and turn on the sonar chart layer. If not, this is the data you'll have. You'll have these cut lines, just missing data. If you come over here and actually toggle on the sonar chart layer, so you can see the difference just right here by this island. I mean, you can tell the difference of what you are missing if you're not taking advantage of the sonar chart layer. I'll do it again and toggle that off for you. You can see the overall of the creek. There's a little drain coming in here up to this island, but it's just nowhere near the data, that you have all in 1 foot contours. And there's several spots. We won't waste a lot of time going over all that, but there's several spots like that on Toledo Bend. It's a lake that has a lot of timber in it. That's another reason there's a lot of that. You see here, another little drain coming in. You got a hump on the west side. Not a lot of detail. You come and click it, and you can tell where every little indentation, every little bend, and all that is on on the map. Same thing kind of back here. I'll do it kind of from a higher level. You can see up, these drains coming in through this flat. It's a big difference when you actually turn that layer on. All right, guys, and the way I'm going to do this webinar, we're going to start out we're going to work deep to shallow. So I know you mostly hear cranking contours, cranking ledges, that sort of thing. Everyone automatically thinks deep. It's not typically, that doesn't always have to be the case. So what I'm going to do is start deep, and when I call deep, it's 20 to 25 foot, which is, in my opinion, that's about as deep as you need to be to effectively fish it with a crankbait. and then we'll move on. While I'm doing deep, I'm going to go over what I look for in contours, the approach I take to the contours, my crankbait selection, and then my rod reel and line setup. And then I'm going to move from there. We'll go into a mid depth of cranking, and to me, mid depth is 12 to 20 foot of water. And then I've got a mid shallow that I call an 8 to 12 foot of water. We'll do the same bullet points there, and then move into shallow, which to me is basically from the dirt out to about 6 foot. Throwing a square bill, that sort of thing. It's not just go down a bank throwing a square bill all the time. So let's get started deep, and we'll start looking at here in Pirates Cove at some different things. Right now it's February. Those fish are heavy pre-spawn mode here. They've really started transitioning up to getting close to spawning flats. But up to about 3 weeks ago, the deep bite was still really good on Toledo Bend and Sam Rayburn. It's a little tougher. They've kind of changed some on Sam Rayburn. Sam Rayburn's 10 feet high, or was 10 feet high. Now it's about 8. Fish are no different than any other animal. Like, if you deer hunt, you understand that deer, they're going to follow edges of things. They'll follow a creek. They're going to follow edges of clear cuts, that sort of thing. When they're moving, they're not just going to typically not just right out in the wide open. Fish are no different. They take migration paths. As whether they're in pre-spawn, spawn, or post-spawn, they're taking those same highways. So what I start looking for, say if it's January, the water temperature about as cold as you're typically on a normal year going to see it, is 48, 50 to 52 degrees is typically what, Sam Rayburn, Toledo Bend. I mean, it'll dip down lower, but that's a more average, is 48, 50 degrees, somewhere in there. I'm going to start out deeper. You can't go wrong. Any of these big pockets like this, you can see all the flats that are in it. A lot of shallow spawning pockets. So anywhere fish spawn is a good place to start. And what I'll do is I've got a Humminbird Solix 15 into dash. I'll put it on side scan, pull up my map, and I start looking for these. Prime example is this so you've got an island here, and what we call in the South, we refer to them as drains. It's basically just a indention coming into like a major flat. And so here you've got the main, I think everyone can see my mouse, out on this bottom, I guess this is the northwest corner of this island. You can see you got kind of a main river channel here. It's 70 feet of water up, 50, it jumps up to 30 pretty quickly. So what I would be looking for there is, and then you see how you have a drain that basically turns and comes into this island. So I'm looking for the steepest contours I can find in that depth range that I'm looking for. So as you see, as you come in this, you have a point on either side of it. And what I look for is little small irregularities that, may have been overlooked by other people. So I'm going to look at, see like this right-hand point here, how the contour lines are real steep and then they turn in real heavy to go back out. I'm going to look right in that turn. It doesn't take a huge difference in contours to be able to pick that up. If to hold fish, it can be small things that a lot of people would overlook. And then the way I would approach this drain here, I would pull up in it. Obviously, in my opinion, this time of year, I'm going to scan. So, if I'm fishing deep in the wintertime, I'm looking for bait and fish relating to that bait, or just schools of bass. You don't always see bait, but I'm looking for one of those two things. So instead of just wasting time dropping trolling motor and fishing it, most of the time I'm going to scan it. And I'm going to look and see what I can find, bait and and bass wise on my side scan. So I'm going to pull into this drain, scan this point, and then go right down the middle of the drain to see where at in that drain those fish are holding. And chances are, once you figure it out in one drain, you're going to be able to duplicate that in multiple areas. So, if you find them on main lake point drains, going into points, so you can kind of start running that all over the lake. It's just in this pocket here. Now you go on the other side of this island, the north side, there's another main lake drain comes right in towards this, this top side of the small island hump right here. That's all stuff you're going to look for. This drain here is no different than any others. They've all got small irregularities. Like as you're coming in, at the bottom south side of that drain, you can see there's just a little indentation there that kind of, and then has a steep turn and goes right back out. Well, what that allows those fish to do is they'll move in, with bait. You have a nice warm couple of days, they'll push in on top of that flat in that little indentation. Boom, it gets cold again. Those fish are easily right back out to deep water. So that's the first thing I'm looking for is, bait and fish. Once I find what I'm looking for, I'm gonna, stay off that thing. This depth range, I'm a huge fan of 6-inch crankbaits. The paint quality, they come with quality hooks out of the box. They get to the depths that they advertise. Let's jump over and I'll kind of show you what I'm looking for when I'm selecting a crankbait. Here's the website, 6inchfishing.com. They have it set up real cool, real easy for you to be able to pick through. Basically hard baits, and then they have their crankbait set up real similar to the way I consider, shallow, medium, and deep. So what I'm looking for here, and the way their numbering are, so as you can see right here, I've got a deep crankbaits, 12 foot and deeper highlighted. They've got a Cloud9, C10, C15, C20, C25. The bigger the number, the deeper that crankbait runs. So comparable, like Strike King has a 5XD, 6XD, 8XD, and then a 10XD. No different here. You got a C10, C15, C20, and C25, and a C25 silent. My preferred choice is Cloud9, C25. Prime example, I have another chart when you click on that bait that shows you the depth ranges at each. It breaks down the C10, the C15, the C20, and the C25, the weights, and how deep they go. Basically turns it into a foolproof system to be able to select the right crankbait for you for what you're doing. If I'm throwing a C25, I'm throwing it on 16-pound fluorocarbon line. Sunline, either Sunline Shooter or Sunline Sniper are my two choices. For the wintertime, I'm looking for, Shad Patterns. I like to throw the gizzard shad color a lot. Maybe, depending on water clarity, I may go in and throw like the shad sense. It's real cool. It's got a chartreuse, stripe down the side of it, some purple hues to it, for deep. That's a good color. And then jump out, summer times, I'm looking at blue chartreuse, and then any kind of a like ghost shad, or you can never go wrong with a gizzard shad color. Kind of my preferred. And kind of back to the map, I'm going to pull in, throwing into that little indentation. Say those fish are, I scan, there's fish in that indentation right there. They're stacked up. I'm going to be deep, throwing shallow. If I can't make those fish aren't always going to just jump on it just because, I see them there. If I can't be deep, throwing shallow, sometimes I'll circle back around and I'll get up here shallow, up here in this 10, 12 foot range, make a long cast out deep, and then bring that crankbait right back up the gut of that little indentation, because they could easily be facing the other way. That's just their preferred. You do that a few times, figure out what works best that given day as far as how those fish want it. If they want the presentation from shallow to deep, deep to shallow, and duplicate that the rest of the day until you kind of figure out. Then you can take the guesswork out of what you need to do when you pull up to these deep spots. As far as the tackle I use for throwing that C25, the reel I use, basically two options. I either the Lew's BB1 Pro Speed Spool. I really like the Lew's Super Duty Wide Speed Spool. The reel holds a ton of line. I use it in a 5-to-1 gear ratio, which is this SDW2S. It holds the ton of line. Believe it or not, it's a small profile reel. That reel actually holds as much line as a Corrado 300, which I think with 12 is almost 200. I mean, it's 160 some odd yards, I think, if I remember that off the top of my head. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry, it shows it right here. So yeah, so a 14 holds 190 yards, approximately 200 yards at 12. In this case, throwing the C25, I'm using 16. So it's going to hold probably 170 yards, which is plenty. Because when you're grinding that crankbait deep into those indentions, and whether it's you know, and sometimes it's irregularities. It's not even something you see on the map. It's going to be a contour you're following, and boom, all of a sudden there's shale there, there's rock there, there's, you know, hey, there's a brush pile there, you know, so it's not always just going to be an obvious. It's basically stuff you know, the more seat time you can have scanning those ledges, the better. And you're gonna have, you know, you're gonna run into those rough spots. So you're gonna be retying a ton. So having a reel that holds, obviously you don't need 200 yards of line to make a cast, but over say a 2-3 week period, if you just, you know, constantly cranking on the weekends, you know, you're cutting off 5 feet at a time, you know, because you got frayed spots from, you know, either from fish, from grinding that crankbait into, you know, clay bottoms, you know, because that's one thing you do need to do is make sure you retie a ton when you're deep cranking. Because it's lighter line, you're fighting this time of year, typically big fish, you know, or they'll be stacked up there, and you don't want to lose a fish of a lifetime because you didn't retie. Moving on to the rod that I use to throw this crankbait. So this is the Lew's Custom Light Speed Stick. They've got a ton of different actions. They have them laid out real cool, or real useful as far as the how they have them named is kind of what they're, you know, some of them is kind of what their purpose is for. On this case, I use this Magnum casting rod, it's the LCL MCR. It's 7'11". So the rod has a ton of backbone, but it also, the last 3 foot of it has a lot of tips. So you can really load up and throw that big crankbait a long ways. That's, you know, my preference. You know, it's a light rod, it's very durable, it's got the non-slip handle on it, you know, so it allows me to throw that crankbait all day. Okay, we'll kind of move into the mid-depth range. You know, as those fish, just say as we're getting, water's warming up, those fish are moving in, you know, they've got spawning on their mind, you know, days are getting a little bit longer, no different. I'm just going to move further into these, you know, into these creeks or these spawning pockets. So like this big arm here, you know, you've got all these spawning pockets, a creek in the, oh, sorry about that, all these creeks in the back here, and you got deep water coming all the way in. Well, as those fish move up, you're going to want to look for, this time of year, you're going to want to look for shallow water that's as close to deep water as possible. Prime example, you can see right here, you've got 40 foot of water right here, and on top of this, you know, you're 20 foot on top of this little point, you roll around the next point, and, you know, boom, you're up in 10 foot of water right here on this point on the side of the island. So your boat could literally be in 30, and you're throwing up in, you know, 10 to 15 foot of water. Same thing on both of them. And this little point and this point, you're kind of looking at, all right, that's a good place for those fish to stop. They can move on top of that flat real easy, but they can be right back, you know, in no time at all, they can be right back in deep water. On the point, as the fish start moving in, they're going to start relating more to those points versus in the wintertime or midsummer, how they're in the middle of some of those deep guts, deep drains. Those fish are going to start relating to those little secondary points as they move in. And this is just a prime example of 2 of them. You got the creek channel swings right in here next to them. You've got two points right here, almost close enough that you can park your boat between the two and fish both, you know, and figure out where those fish are. Really no different approach as far as, you know, I'm still going to scan those to see where I can find fish, you know, hopefully visually see the fish before I start, you know, fishing for them. And then, you know, pull off that crankbait. This time, you know, I'm going to go to go back to the C20 for this depth range. The C20 is 18 to 22. You know, if it's, even if I'm in a 15 foot of water, I still, because in my opinion, the more you make bottom contact, the more that thing's running and bouncing and deflecting, the better chances you are, you know, of catching fish. Those little small reaction bites, you know, especially this time of year where the weather can be very, you know, one day it's cloudy, rainy, and they're absolutely choking on it. The next day it's bright, you know, the fronts come through, it's bright bluebird skies, and you need that reaction bite. You need it to deflect off something. That fish just jump on it, you know, just out of nowhere, just out of pure reaction. So I go to the C20. It's, it still weighs an ounce, almost an ounce and a half. You can throw that bait a long, long way, cover tons of water, and you can crank it hard to get it down. And what I do is I crank it hard to get it down. Once I make bottom contact, I'll kind of almost worm it through through those points. You hit the bottom is you'll worm it, kind of let it float up, and then I'll hit it hard again. Just kind of being very, very what the fish wants. Or you crank it, hit it hard, come and eat it on the stop. Sometimes they want to bring it all the way down the bottom, and then you just almost like drag it through like a Carolina rig, and you just feel it load up. So you just got to kind of trial and error, figure out how those fish want it. Moving on to the reel. So I use the exact same reel for all my cranking, as far as deep cranking. So I've got 4 of these SW2 TS, the 5-to-1s. Now, when I go to the 20, I go back down to 12. 12 is where I prefer to crank with. I can throw it a long ways. And again, so now I'm holding with 12, I'm holding 210 yards or so of line, which allows me to use the same reel. That makes that line last because I can, take some off as I need to, and boom, I'm right back to fresh line. So now I do change it up some on the rod. I don't use this Lew's Custom Light Speed Stick on it. So here I use this Lew's Custom Plus Speed Stick, very similar rod. Still has the slip resistant handle, which I absolutely love over cork. It doesn't stain. And then so they've got a Super Duty 1, 2, 3, 4 here. I use this LSD1, the Super Duty 1. So on this one, I'll throw, kind of back to that crankbait, I'll throw a C20 and a C15 on the exact same rod, both with 12-pound line. That rod has a light tip. I can throw that bait a long ways. Like I said, I'm still throwing it with that's a 7'11" rod, and I mean you can really, because you don't want to snap it like you're throwing like a spinnerbait. You want it to load up and just you let the rod do the work. Throw that bait way out there, because the further you can cast it, the deeper you can get that bait. Because the first few feet of that is just wasted trying to get it to go straight down. And something I didn't mention earlier, we were talking about the sonar chart program before I get too far ahead of myself. So on that sonar chart program, you have to have an active account to be able to update your card. And just real quick, one thing Navionics is doing right now for the month of February, typically a chart card subscription for a year is $99. Right now it's on sale for $49.99 all the way up to February 28th. So you got about a week left. Something pretty, if you're looking at wanting to have better mapping, I would definitely take advantage of that. Okay, let's get back to what we're talking on cranking. So say moving into that medium to shallow range, you have a few more options there. Let's see. Going to hard baits. You have the C15 and C10. They both kind of do what you're looking for as far as that. What I call medium shallow is an 8 to 12 foot water. The C10 and C15 are both capable of getting to both those depths. If there's a question, that I want to get it down, I'm going to go with the one that's rated a little heavier. So I'm going to go with the C15. And again, this bait really is, so looking at the map, same thing, so now if I'm cranking that depth range, either the fish are just about to move on to beds, or, they're moving back out. So that's, May, shad spawn's going on. So those fish have a tendency of wanting to be up, and shad spawn's a prime example of that. So they're going to have a tendency to want to be up first thing in the morning, really feeding on active bait fish. But as the sun gets up, they're going to move right back into those deeper water spots. So right here on the side of this island, this is the same drain that we've been working our way in on now. So you got deep water, steep contours right here next to this island. Well, those fish are on a shad spawn, they're going to relate to either a hard grass or wood or rock, and they'll go up and they'll bust on the shad that morning. Well, like right here. boom, they can be right up there on the sides of this island, feeding heavy. And then as soon as the sun gets up, they can ease back down, into into that little bit deeper water. And one of the things that you always hear as kind of a cliche type statement, but when you're cranking, wind is definitely your friend. So if you can, I know it makes it a little bit, especially in the wintertime, it makes it a little bit more miserable to be out there, but wind is definitely your friend as far as, breaking up the surface, getting that bait fish active, to make those fish not quite as spooky on the bottom. Breaking up that sunlight, especially if you start moving into shallower cranking. Because any little bit, even a lake that's not generating, the wind can generate a little bit of current. So going into next, I would consider shallow, shallow cranking, which is, in my opinion, is dirt all the way out to 6 foot. For that, I'm actually going to switch gears a little bit on that. I've got two choices on that. So my absolute favorite crankbait that 6 Sense makes is the Movement 80. So had a real good call. I don't know if anyone caught it. FLW event, the BFL All-American. Nick DeBrum actually won that event throwing this crankbait up around cypress trees. And as you can see, it's got a rounded profile. So it's got a very rounded profile to it. It deflects off stuff like crazy. So I mean, it doesn't get hung up. It's great on rock. So it's kind of it's a square bill, but a little bit bigger. Dives a little, it only dives 3 to 5 feet. It's awesome around heavy cover. It's got a ton. It's not like a square bill that has a tight action. It's got a real wide wobble to it. It can be a lot of fun to throw. I've caught them real good, all the way up. This is the bait I'm going to pick up. Right now, prime example, we're talking about Toledo Bend, how they're moving into pre-spawn. They'll be spawning in the next couple of weeks. Covering water with that crankbait. We caught them real well on it last weekend. You're moving up further into these spawning pockets looking for wood, grass, that sort of thing. Another great area. Like looking at this drain here coming in, you got another point coming out, real heavy contours. You can see those heavy contours, which is contours that are stacked closer together. They actually funnel further into this pocket. So this is a deep water pocket. So those fish are going to be a little further into it than say one that's a real flat area. I'm going to be throwing that crankbait. Now, once I get into throwing a square bill, especially one of this size here, as we can see, this bait, it's not a small square bill. I mean, it's over 3 inches long. It weighs almost 3/4 of an ounce. I throw it on 20-pound fluorocarbon. I'm not trying to get it down. I'm trying to get it, around cover, and I want it when you're catching big fish on a crankbait around cover. I want something I can get them away from it. So going to my rod and reel setup. The rod I use for this is actually the Lew's Custom Speed Stick, and I use this football jig rod model. It's a 7.3 rod right here, football jig. It's a heavy action, medium fast retrieve, so it's a very slow bend to the rod. Allows me to make super accurate casts with it, and then I'm able to, get there's enough power over that rod that I can pull those fish out of that, either, because if I'm throwing a square bill up shallow, I'm either hitting wood, I'm throwing it on trees, especially as those fish are moving in. You don't really sure if they're just pre-spawn or if they're actually trying to spawn. They're going to spawn on hard spots up, say right next to Toledo Bend is notorious for having a ton of cypress trees. That's where this past weekend we were throwing. I threw a stone around cypress trees because those fish will spawn on those root systems. So in that situation, I'm not going to want a flimsy rod that if that fish eats it, I can't move it and get it out, because if it gets you hung up, with treble hooks, you're basically done. So I go to a little bit heavier setup, going over to the reels. So I use the Team Lew's Custom Pro Speed Spool in a 7-to-1 gear ratio. Good. up around those trees. And once I'm going to, it's not gonna. I'm not wasting time. I'm getting it back in the boat, making another cast. I'm making a ton of, and when I'm doing, I'm gonna be in, close quarters, making real quick underhand flips, into these trees. So, it's going to be you want to be super accurate. So I like that small reel, 20-pound fluorocarbon, to make those little short pitches and recover that bait quickly. Now, coloring for that. Now, let's go back to these other crankbaits here. So another option, when you're fishing shallow like that, is they also make a ton of that. The Crush 50, the Movement L7, the Swank. The Swank's a cool little crankbait because it's got like an L-shaped bill. So it dives, still in that 2 to 5 foot, and they got some cool little videos here of it deflecting off stuff. Something to check out. Excuse me. This bait just has a little bit different action to it than, say, the one we just looked. It doesn't have quite as wide a wobble as that movement bait does. But again, it's great around trees. It's the same body profile, just a different lip. So it actually helps it bounce off stuff really well. This time of year on Toledo Bend, Sam Rayburn, your reds are real popular. Those fish are eating crawfish. My personal favorite is the custom bluegill, which is sold out now. It's got some red in it. Those fish are, as they're spawning, this bluegill moving up, trying to, steal eggs, that sort of thing. So they're very protective of a bluegill coming through there. Another crankbait option you've got, like I said, once you go up shallow, shallower, there's a ton of different options of stuff you can throw. Now, something we really didn't talk about that's really put Toledo Bend and Sam Rayburn on the map, in my opinion, is another form of cranking is throwing a lipless crankbait. So December through February, sometimes early March, depending on the winter they've had, there's always hydrilla on both legs. You're going to be looking at same deal, except that hydrilla is not going to grow as far. So you're going to look at the sides of these flats, sides of points close to deep water that are holding hydrilla, and that hydrilla is super easy to find because basically you can pull into a pocket, hit side scan out to about 100 feet because you don't need a ton of detail, and you can identify that hydrilla in a hurry. Turn around, go back through it, throw in a lipless crankbait. Me, I like to use. Come here, you got several options here. I either like the Quake or the Snatch. So we'll look at the Quake 80. The Quake 80 is, it's a 3/4, basically a 3/4 ounce crankbait, rattle trap. Quake 70 is going to be a 5/8, the one I throw the most. And it's the same deal. I'm going to be looking at in something like what they call this freak show. It's almost like the old bleeding shiner. And here he is, the actual Clayton's shiner, they call it here, but it's a bleeding shiner trap. It's a really good color. But then anytime, crawfish crave, or crackle crawl, both those reds with some browns mixed in are a real good color throwing, in hydrilla. And again, we'll actually shoot over and go to a different side of the lake. This is housing. Anyone that comes to Toledo, has fished Toledo Bend, knows where Housing Bay is. It's the same deal. You got a ton of drains, ton of shallow spawning pockets, bridges, timber. Really, it's another one of those little pockets that has it all. Coming here, this is Hurricane. If I'm throwing that rattle trap or any kind of lipless crankbait, moving it back to these pockets as those fish move up, getting ready to spawn, picking them apart, with a lipless crankbait. When I'm throwing a lipless crankbait, I'm same deal. I'm using the 7-to-1 Leo's Custom Pro Speed Spool, and I throw my trap, my lipless crankbaits on the exact same rod that I throw that big square bill on. I throw them all on the football jig rod. That rod has seemed like it has the perfect amount of backbone and tip to allow me to throw a trap. It lets you rip it out of the grass, but when it rips out, you don't rip it out of those fish's mouth. They come up, eat it, and then they don't throw it very often. Line, when I'm throwing it, if it's typical hydrilla, that's up 3 or 4 foot off the bottom, I'm throwing it with 20-pound fluorocarbon. If it gets to where they're really on top of the thicker hydrilla, I'm throwing it on 50 or 60-pound braid. That was a lot less work because you need to throw it on a lighter rod, which still works good with that football jig rod. But I'm ripping. When you're ripping out a trap all day, it's a lot of work on you. Whereas if you go to something like a 50-pound braid, it's not near as much work to pop that trap out. You just have to be a little bit careful not to, rip the hook out of those fish's mouth. That kind of concludes the most that I wanted to cover. Let's go ahead and start kind of looking at questions, because I know that normally spins off in some other stuff. If you would, either use the chat to type messages, or there is a questions place we can see if I can get it to where I can see all the questions. All right, here we go. Yeah, did the audio come back? I had a deal that popped up that showed that I was having a loss of audio just for a second, but it came back. I see a few people commented it did. Are we back good with good sound, or is there still an issue with the sound? Okay, good deal. Thanks, Randall. All right, let's get to some questions. All right, David asked, fishing for kayak, would you recommend a 7-to-1 reel versus a 5-to-1? If I'm deep cranking, no, because a 7-to-1 reel is more work on you to get the bait down. You want something. It's no different if you think of riding a mountain bike. When you go up, to a higher gear, going up a hill, it's a lot harder for you on your legs to move it up. Whereas, it's fewer revolutions, but it's harder for your legs to keep up. Whereas, like a 5-to-1 reel, yeah, your hand's moving a lot faster, but it's getting the bait down. Robert Dupree asked, how do you decide whether to throw a round bill or a square bill? I'm assuming you're talking, I don't know if you're talking shallow with a square bill and a round bill, or if you would give me a little more information on what exactly you mean there. If you're talking, how do I decide if I'm going to crank deep, or if I'm going to fish shallow, or if I'm going to try to throw a small round bill or a square bill up shallow, I'm sorry. Then Jonathan Martinez asked, will the bass still be relating the drains on Rayburn in late April? Yes, they will. They'll be on their way out because they have typically already spawned then. So that's when your shad spawn, I kind of covered earlier, the shad spawn is happening. They're, the fish are moving in to eat shad early, and they're working their way back out. You're going to really, you can still catch them in that 12 to 14 real well. First thing in the morning, they're going to be up eating shallow, just gorging themselves because they're just got through spawning. So yeah, they'll definitely still be relating to drains. Typically on Rayburn, they relate to drains all year long. It's just different areas of the drain, whether they're the main lake in the summer and the winter, or or they're either going to be out main lake deeper, or they're going to be, as the spawn is either right before or right after, they'll be a little further into those drains. Mike Meredith asked, when fishing early season drains like on Amistad, do you recommend crawfish cranks? And if so, stay red or migrate to yellows and greens? Mike, I've never fished Amistad. I know it's a rock lake, so I know it's going to be a little different as far as what your crawfish are. Rayburn is, I can relate to, I've fished Table Rock a lot. So Table Rock is better with a, a brown crawl, a green crawl than it is a red. Rayburn is typically better with a red. But me, I even with on Rayburn, I'll throw red some, and if they're really eating it, I'll just keep throwing it. But in my opinion, I feel like anyone who comes to Rayburn that didn't fish a lot, that's the first thing they want to throw that time of year. So I'm going to try to venture with some browns. Years ago, they used to make what they called a brown eye trap. It was a real good trap. It was brown with a black spot around its eye. Those fish still eat that thing really well. Mark Frenner asked, what brand fluorocarbon do you use? I use 100% Sunline. I either use the Sunline shooter. But sometimes I use shooters. If I'm cranking with 12, I'll use shooter. For anything else, I use Sunline sniper, either in 20 or if I'm throwing a big crankbait. I'll use 16 with it. What line am I using for deep crankbaits from Tony Mello? So I'm using a shooter 12 most of the time, Sunline shooter. It's a little more expensive, but it's at the abrasion resistance is real good for that 12-pound test. So I don't mind going, a little bit more expensive on just for that 1 or 2 rods. Typically, if it's not 12, I'm going to be using the Sunline Sniper. Sunline Sniper makes a real good fluorocarbon. Let's see. So Robert Burkett asked, how do I highlight a certain depth of my carbon? So on Lowrance, which you have to be kind of be patient with me on the terminology on that. I'm a big time Humminbird user. But as long as your unit, your card has to be active. You have to have an active account with it to do that. And then once you do that, you go into your menu under view, and it will allow you, and then your card options, and it will allow you to select a range. And you can't do the ranges quite like you can on the app, but you can highlight certain depth ranges. Randall asked, what retrieve do I use in fishing a crankbait? If I'm deep cranking, I'm cranking as fast as I can until I can get that bait making contact with the bottom. So then once I use bottom, then I'm going to slow down, either stop, speed up. Then once I hit the bottom, I'm going to very much retrieve, either dragging it across the bottom. But yeah, typically if I'm throwing a square bill, I'm going to throw it. I'm going to very much retrieve until I get 2 bites. 1 bite can be a fluke, 2 bites is a pattern. That's my opinion on that. Robert Dupree asked, okay, you're back on. Okay, I got you. Yeah, so the deep dive and square bill crankbait bite, that's something I'm going to throw in that 6 to 12, more than likely. I know they make some that dive deeper than that. I'm not real confident in them unless it's at 6 to 12. Those fish are relating to that type. So really anything over that, I'm throwing around and bill deep dive and crankbait. Harley asked if I'd use 25-pound line for mid-depth around wood and no rocks. No, I wouldn't. I don't use 25 for anything other than flipping. My personal preference. Some people do, some people don't. My opinion is that's too heavy of a line to throw a crankbait with. It overpowers a crankbait. You don't get enough wobble out of it, and it doesn't work well. William asked my suggestions for using rattles or not. So I start with rattles, and say if I'm catching a few fish and all of a sudden they stop, I'll pick up a silent. Or if it's a lake, say I'm fishing a community hole and I know other people are out there cranking, I'm going to try something different. So I'm going to, pick up something that's silent to try to get a fish or two that maybe somebody else didn't catch because they're, using a loud crankbait. Butch asked, when did you say you liked a round bill versus a square bill? Really the only time I throw a square bill is if I'm in shallower water. I mean, I'll throw the Magnum square bill some, but 90% of the time, if I'm throwing the square bill, it's because I'm in shallow water and I'm wanting to deflect off of, wood, rock, that sort of thing. Randall asked if I can show the path again from moving deep to shallow. Yeah, no problem at all. Let's go back over the chart. Let me move this down a little bit. So let's move back over here to where I was earlier. So those fish are gonna, I mean, they're gonna use these as highways. Like say if you come in here, fish are hanging out here. Hey, in the middle of winter, the water temperature is 38, lower 40s. They're hanging out here in 40 foot of water off the side of this point. Well, as it starts warming up, those fish are going to slowly just start working their way in because they're not going to spawn in 40 foot of water. So they're going to start working their ways into these, in these drains, and they're going to be stopping at little irregularities along the way. Mostly the spots that hold baits. They're going to be coming in through here. They're going to stop in these little points. I think everyone looks at, someone pulls up to this and go, all right, yeah, they're definitely going to be on these little obvious, like this point here, it couldn't be any more obvious. But maybe not this little point because it's not as obvious. To me, you need to look for those areas that do get overlooked. Toledo Bend's a very pressure lake, so I do that there. I try to find stuff that I feel like gets overlooked. So instead of these, real obvious big points, come back and look at this little point here. It doesn't get hit as hard by it. And then as it starts warming up, those fish just keep moving in. They spawn and then they work their way same way back out. Go back. Do I upgrade the split rings or hooks? I actually don't have to. So on other crankbaits I've used, I've had to. 6-inch, he actually goes the extra mile with hooks and split rings. I've never had any issues with either one of them. Patrick asked, can I mark waypoints on the Navionics chart viewer website and migrate them to your Navionics card? You can't on the website, but you can on the app. So if you use the phone app, the tablet app, and you have a Lowrance unit that is Bluetooth compatible, you can link those two units and you can actually upload the waypoints. I can't really give you, like I said, I'm not a big Lowrance user. Josh Douglas, if you look at joshdouglasfishing.com, he's got a YouTube channel as well. He's got some really cool videos. The guy knows those Lowrance units inside and out. Does the same thing I do, but different region. And that guy can really help you out with your Lowrance units. And Mark asked, do I think a wide wobble works better certain times of the year? I do. I feel like, as you're moving into the spawn, I like a real tight wobble in the, say, pre-spawn. When you move into the spawn and post-spawn, I like a wider wobble crankbait. So, that's typically when I'm going to look for something like that. Mike asked if I tie directly to the crankbait or use a snap. No, I tie directly to the O-ring that comes on the crankbait. Just not that they don't work. To me, it's one more fail point. So snaps kind of scare me. I know tons of people. I know a lot more accomplished anglers than myself that do that. I'm just not one of them. Mark asked, does 6-inch have a tight pattern or mostly a wide wobble? I know all their lipless stuff is real tight, tight patterned crankbaits. They have I think someone else asked a little bit earlier if they had any flat-sided crankbaits. So they have the Crush Flat 75 is a very tight wobble. It's a flat crankbait, very tight wobble. It's basically a small Rattles, lipless crankbait with a lip on it. Same thing. So yeah, it's a very good crankbait. Jeff asked, do I throw balsa crankbaits much? I do when I'm river fishing. There is every once in a while, if I'm a river, like the Sabine River is right by my house. We fished the Bass Marsh Open on it 2 years ago, and there is a time and a place for them. If I'm fishing a lot of cypress trees, a lot of big root systems, and I may try balsa. They float up a little quicker, so I can kind of be in and out of them a little quicker. Harley asked, when using wind to crank, you suggest into the wind or with it or crosswind? That's kind of one of the, in my opinion, I know there's all these old school sayings about, they're facing into it or they're facing away from it. To me, it's trial and error. Uh, I like to be throwing with the wind and pulling it back through it, but that doesn't always work either. So it's kind of one of those things, however you can fish the spot. Uh, Now, if you can, yeah, it's a lot easier being upwind, being that you have all the advancements with like Ultrex, spot lock, and all that. Um, it makes it easy to be upwind throwing down and not, and still having good boat control. Or, even if you're downwind, which makes it hard to cast into, if you catch a fish, you don't lose your spot. So Patrick asked, yeah, does 6 cents have a good tight wobble bait like a Shad Wrap? Yeah, and that's what we just looked at with this Crush Flat 75. Butch asked if you update the Navionics this month on special, and yours normally update in April, May. Does your new update month go to February? I would think it would. I would think your new update would just start from today. So if you did it today, I would start February 20th. Would be a year. If I had to guess, I'm not 100% sure on that. That wouldn't be something bad to call Navionics' helpline and see if they could help you with that there. Jonathan asked me if cranking isn't working or everyone is doing it, what are some of your top techniques to switch to when fishing ditches? I like throwing a big swim bait. And by big swim bait, if it's deep, it's going to be something like with a big paddle tail with a big head on it, a big jig head. It's a little more subtle. I'm also a big drop shot fan. So, if it's something that's kind of going to be my first two things I'm looking at. Depending on time of year, maybe a big Carolina rig, something in those lines. Jim asked, can I answer an Navionics tech question? I can. The best way to handle that is if you would email me at cstanley@navionics.com, which is the email that is linked to this webinar. I can get you a better answer that way than on the webinar. Jim asks, anytime cranking for summer months? Nighttime cranking for summer months? No, Jim, I typically don't crank at night at all. I like to throw a big worm, a football jig, something along those lines at night. Or a whopper plopper or a buzz bait. That's basically what I stick with. Rondo asked, do I move pretty fast to an area until you catch fish? Yeah, I do. I like to, in my opinion, I would rather cover more water for looking for active fish than to sit still trying to talk a fish into biting. So that's kind of what, my personal preference. So that kind of answers all the questions. I'm going to ask one Navionics question to all you guys, and the first one to respond right, 6 cents is going to send out some of their Cloud9 crankbaits. We've talked about a lot of different stuff. What is the name of the layer that stores all the updates through your Navionics chart card? And Patrick Hawkins named it first with Sonar Chart. That is correct. Patrick, if you can email me cstanley@navionics.com all of your information, your mailing address, name, email, and all that stuff, I'll get all that stuff sent out to you and get you taken care of. Guys, that will conclude tonight's webinar. Again, all of you have my email address. I'll be doing another one of these things in a couple of months. All of you have my email address. So if anything else you can think of, comes up after we get off here, feel free to reach out to me. My Facebook is just Corey Stanley, Corey Stanley, or it's cstanley@navionics.com. Feel free to shoot me an email with anything that you may think of after we end this webinar. And if there's any way I can help, I'd be more than happy to. Technical questions through Navionics or any fishing related stuff, feel free to reach out. I appreciate everybody tuning into the webinar and being very, all the participation. You will be notified. This webinar will be stored on the Navionics website. Once all that stuff's done, you'll be notified. So you can go back and watch it again if you need to. Again, guys, I greatly appreciate all of you, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.